Have you ever imagined having a secret power? Maybe like the ability to talk to animals, or to make a flower bloom just by thinking about it. For thousands of years, people all over the world have told stories about magic. They have whispered tales of individuals who seem to understand the hidden secrets of nature. These people were often called witches. Witchcraft, in its simplest form, is the idea of using special knowledge or rituals to influence the world around us. It's a story as old as humanity itself, woven into the fabric of our history, our art, and, our deepest curiosities about the unseen forces that shape our lives. But what does it truly mean to be a witch? In some cultures, a witch was a respected healer, a wise person who knew which plants could soothe a fever, or which words could bring comfort. They were the keepers of ancient traditions, understanding the cycles of the moon and the turning of the year. In other times and places, though, the word witch carried a much darker meaning. It became a label for someone who was feared, someone believed to be working with malevolent spirits to cause harm. Stories were told of witches who could spoil crops with a single glance, who could fly through the night sky on a broomstick, or who could cast spells to bring misfortune to their neighbors. Understanding the story of witchcraft is like exploring a vast and ancient forest. There are sunlit clearings where magic seems gentle and helpful, and there are dark, tangled thickets where it appears frightening and unknown. Why has the idea of witches captured our imagination for so long? It seems to be a fundamental part of human nature to be curious about things we cannot easily explain. Before the age of science, the world was filled with mysteries. When a sudden storm ruined the harvest, or when a strange illness swept through a village, people desperately sought a reason. This fascination was fed by stories, passed down from one generation to the next around the hearth fire. These tales were the entertainment of their time, filled with heroes, villains, and incredible magical feats. Witches in these stories could be wonderfully complex characters. They could be cunning tricksters who outsmarted kings, or they could be terrible monsters who lived in the dark woods. There was a time in history when the fascination with witches turned into a dark and terrible fear. This period, mostly in Europe from the 1400s to the 1700s, is now known as the time of the Great Witch Hunts. It was an era of immense change and uncertainty. Wars, diseases, and religious conflicts made people feel that their world was unstable and dangerous. In this atmosphere of anxiety, fear of the devil and his followers grew to a fever pitch. It was widely believed that witches were real, and that they had made a pact with evil forces to destroy society from within. Leaders of both church and state began to actively hunt for people they suspected of witchcraft. They published books that described in great detail how to identify a witch, how to question them, and how to put them on trial. Once a person was accused, they were arrested and interrogated. These interrogations were frequently brutal, using methods of torture to force a confession. Under such terrible conditions, many innocent people confessed to crimes they did not commit. Thousands of people, the vast majority of them women, were executed during these centuries of madness. They were hanged, burned at the stake, or died in prison while awaiting their fate. One of the most famous episodes of witch hunting in history did not happen in Europe, but in a small colonial village in America. In 1692, the community of Salem Village in the Massachusetts Bay Colony was gripped by a terrifying panic. It began when a few young girls started to behave very strangely. They would scream, contort their bodies into unnatural positions, and claim to be pinched and pricked by invisible spirits. When pressured by the village adults to name who was tormenting them, the girls pointed their fingers at several local women, accusing them of witchcraft. The community, a strict and deeply religious Puritan society, took these accusations with deadly seriousness. Before the hysteria finally subsided, more than 200 people had been accused of witchcraft in and around Salem. 19 men and women were hanged, and several others died in the squalid, overcrowded jails. During the height of the witch hunts, the beliefs about what witches did were both, fantastic and terrifying. It was commonly thought that witches had rejected God and entered into a formal pact with the devil. People believed that witches held secret, nocturnal meetings called a witch's sabbat. They were said to fly through the night, sometimes on broomsticks or even on the backs of animals, to gather in remote places like forests or mountains. The powers attributed to witches directly reflected the everyday fears of a farming society. A witch could supposedly cause a cow to stop giving milk, make butter refuse to churn, or spoil an entire batch of beer with a single curse. Witches were also believed to possess familiars, which were said to be low-ranking demons that took the form of small animals like cats, toads, dogs, or mice. While the authorities were hunting for devil-worshipping, broomstick-flying villains, a very different kind of magic was being practiced quietly in villages all across the world. This was not the stuff of fantasy or horror, but a practical set of beliefs and traditions known as folk magic. The people who practiced it were not trying to make a pact with evil forces. Instead, they were often the respected, if sometimes feared, wise men and women of their communities. Folk magic was also used for protection. People would come to a cunning person to buy a charm or an amulet to ward off bad luck or illness. Farmers might have a ritual performed in their fields to ensure a good harvest. Another important role of the folk magician was to find lost things and foretell the future. This was not about grand prophecies, but about answering the practical questions of daily life. As the world moved into the 1700s and 1800s, a great shift in thinking began to occur. This period is known as the Age of Enlightenment, a time when science, reason, and logic became increasingly important. They discovered that diseases were caused by tiny germs, not by evil curses, and that weather patterns followed predictable laws of nature, not the whims of a vengeful witch. The Brothers Grimm, in the 19th century, collected old folk tales and published them, cementing the image of the fairy tale witch in our collective imagination. Figures like the evil queen in Snow White, or the candy house witch in Hansel and Gretel. By the 20th century, the witch had been almost completely reinvented. She became a figure of fun and fantasy, especially at Halloween. Children would dress up as witches with green faces and pointed hats, not out of fear, but as part of a playful celebration. In the modern world, the word witchcraft has taken on meanings that would have been unimaginable during the time of the witch hunts. For many people today, witchcraft is a spiritual path and a recognized religion. This religion is often called Wicca, or sometimes simply modern paganism. Modern Wiccans and pagans see their spirituality as a nature-based religion. They honor the cycles of the seasons, from the planting of seeds in spring to the final harvest in autumn, through a calendar of 8 festivals known as the Wheel of the Year. Looking back at the long and complicated history of witchcraft is like holding a mirror up to humanity. The story is not really about spells and broomsticks. It is about us. It shows us our capacity for wonder and our deep-seated need to find explanations for the world around us. The quiet wisdom of the cunning folk shows our desire for healing and security. But the mirror also shows a darker reflection. The story of the witch hunts is a brutal and important lesson. It reveals how societies, when gripped by fear and uncertainty, can turn on their most vulnerable members. By understanding this history, we can become more compassionate and wiser citizens of the world today. We can learn to recognize the patterns of prejudice and scapegoating when they appear. Ultimately, the journey through the history of witchcraft is a journey of understanding. It helps us understand how beliefs can shape reality for better or for worse. It shows how ideas can evolve over centuries, transforming a figure of terror into a symbol of empowerment. And most importantly, it reminds us that the past is always with us, its echoes shaping our present and offering us invaluable lessons for the future. By listening to these echoes, we can learn not only about the fascinating world of witches, but also about the enduring complexities of the human heart.